Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Sendex. Land is necessary to all production, no matter what be the kind or form. Land is the standing place, the workshop, the storehouse of labor. It is to the human being the only means by which he can obtain access to the material universe or utilize its powers. Without land, man cannot exist. No man created the earth, but to a large extent all take from the earth a portion of it and mold it into useful things for the use of man. Without land, man cannot live. Without access to it, man cannot labor.
Good day, this is Nation and Conversation. We welcome you from Forum Homini in the cradle of humankind. Today we continue our discussion on land ownership. We ask the question, is there a place for different land ownership models in agriculture? Remember to join the conversation on Twitter @NationConverse. Joining me in the studio is Mpumelelo Mkabela, editor of the Sowetan, and Piet Kroukamp, political analyst and columnist. Piet, I would like to start with you. During the last 6 to 9 months, you had experience with dealing with some of South Africa's biggest commercial farmers. Give us an idea of that experience and what it's all about.
Well, I think the important thing is the really big guys, the really big farmers, the big commercial farmers, they become a type of industry almost on their own and separate from the notion of agriculture in the farming sense, the family farming sense. And in that context, a whole range of things changes rather quickly. One of the things that changes is, for instance, the relationship between a farm worker and the owner of the farm or farm managers. In the past, I would think that was what could call it a rather authoritarian relationship, a paternalistic relationship. But in these big industries, big farming industries, that becomes one where there's highly trained workers that you have on a farm. It's almost an insult to call him a worker anymore. It's not a worker. It's somebody that provides a very complicated service for which you need training and experience. And the equipment that you use on these big farms are worth millions and millions. And in the process, you will see that the value of the labor or the value of the service that's provided by the so-called farm worker has increased exponentially. And you will also see that in the relationship between the owner of the farm and the worker, but also in terms of the socioeconomic status of the worker. And that's why it makes sense to almost go to the mega level of industrialization of farming, because it does change a whole range of things that are historical weaknesses, I would say, in our political, economic, and agricultural dispensation.
If I just look at some of the numbers of these big farms, they could actually be listed entities on the JSE in terms of the complexity, the business models, and their financials.
Yes, exactly. There's about, I would say, around about 36 farmers in South Africa with an annual turnover of between 500 million and 6, 7, even 8 billion rand per year. That puts them in a very, very different league as far as the business model is concerned. Just below them, there's around about 30,000 farmers in South Africa, which is already functioning on an economy of scale level. And then, of course, you have a number of farmers that perform. We have, in small-scale farmers, we have 400,000, the estimate is. So I think the difference between a small-scale farmer, the family farm, and then the industrial farm is quite significant, the differences between them.
And those big mega farms, they can compete with any farming entity in the world, and that is where they compete.
Some of these guys, some of these farmers, they operate on international markets. They are playing in the same economic and financial arena as the big players, agricultural players in the world. I would say that some of the farmers in South Africa have, to a large degree, transplanted much of their businesses elsewhere in the world. For instance, a few of them are operating in Europe and in South America and in Asia, and actually have 50% of their business outside of South Africa. I'm not saying they trade or they sell 50% of the produce. They actually are involved in agriculture in other continents, in Europe and in Asia, which leaves 50% of their daily business outside of South Africa.
Mpumelelo, if one listens to that, that is a complete different mindset from what a farm and farming operations is. If we look at the challenges in South Africa, how do you fit that into our challenges?
Well, Pete is right. I mean, look, we should get rid of the notion that you still have peasants in the farms. You still have farm laborers. You still have farm servants. That kind of mentality should change as the agricultural arena develops to that kind of mega globalized industry that it describes. You also need to upskill your workers to be part of that kind of development. And those who are fortunate to have some level of education, you have to get them involved in the actual management of the business. Some involve them at another level in terms of partnerships. How do you partner with them so that you can deal with the legacy of the past, you can neutralize it, but also at the same time conscientize them to the world of globalization, that they need to operate at that level as well. You see, it's interesting that what has spawned this development, this mega industrialization that he's talking about, is basically a political development in its own right, because that would not have happened had you not had the transition that we had from apartheid to democracy. It opened up a lot of business opportunities.
It opened up markets and free enterprise and trade in the rest of the world.
As well as the movement of people. So what he's talking about, the farmers are able to diversify their investments all over the world. They are able to plant everywhere, precisely because of the democracy that opened up all of this. Some of them have just crossed just north of Limpopo. Some have just crossed to Mozambique. Some have crossed to Zambia. A huge number of them are farming in war-torn countries like DR Congo at a large scale. So the question is, how do you then get that benefit that comes from the political process, plowing it back to those who are in need, who need to be uplifted, so that everybody benefits from the developments that we're talking about?
Nation in Conversation will be back after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. We continue our discussion on land ownership models. With me in the studio, Mpumelelo Mkabela, editor of the Sowetan, and Piet Kroukamp, political analyst and columnist. Piet, we discussed the fact that we're getting very big mega farmers that are going to play a major role in the economy, in the agriculture economy. It will be greatly beneficial to the people in the employment, which is not going to be workers, it's going to be various level of management, guys with career opportunities. But where does that leave agriculture as a large-scale employer in South Africa?
Well, agriculture over the last 20 years have shed about 500,000 jobs. It now employs about 500,000 people, which is still more than is employed by the mining industry. But if you take, let's call it the industrial part of agriculture, in other words, the top 8,000 farmers, no jobs were shed in that particular sector. And the simple reason is that even though they imported technology at a large scale, they mechanized on a large scale, they grew, they expanded massively. Agriculture has grown by 30% since 1990 in South Africa, and it has grown in that particular sector. That 20% of the agricultural sector that produces 80% of the food, no jobs were really shed there because they grew. They actually upskilled their workers. Just below that, on the level of the family farm, there you had massive job losses because of political uncertainty, and also perhaps most of those farmers couldn't maintain an economically viable project on their farms. The family farm in South Africa today is a lower to a middle class project. It is not a financially feasible project anymore, and there we shed a whole lot of jobs in South Africa. So if we want to actually employ people, if we want to upskill them, we have to commercialize our agriculture. We will not shed jobs because we will grow. The economy, agriculture is only 2%, 2 to 2.4% of GDP. There's absolutely no reason why it can't expand to 5 and 6 and 7% of GDP. And that will happen if you have a political environment which allow entrepreneurship, allow growth, and allow a further integration into the international economy. Perhaps even more than what has happened in the last 10, 15 years.
And that will not be a zero-sum game. Those markets will be international, they will be competitive, and they'll be playing on the international stage.
The big farmers in South Africa are extremely competitive. Over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been the biggest exporter of citrus to Europe. So we are extremely competitive. We are allowed to enter the market on a fair basis. Obviously, it's very, very difficult with a whole lot of state protection that you get in many, many other countries. But in spite of that, the South African farmer, the commercial farmer, had been very, very successful in penetrating international markets.
Mpumelelo, where does that leave the more traditional farm in the traditional areas?
Well, if the average white farmer who had settled on a farm and had been farming for years and had become now unviable because of the mega industrialists that have emerged, can't sustain himself, you can imagine that leaves the communal land, I can't say owners because they don't own the land, the communal land holding system, even at the worst stage. So you need a completely different mindset in those communities who still live under communal land ownership. You need different models there. If you can't give them the land to own and to use it to raise capital so that they can reach the stage of the highly industrialized guys, at the very least, you will perhaps have to try and encourage cluster farming. Cluster farming, it's a new concept in South Africa, but I think it's growing. Some banks have begun to acknowledge that perhaps they can work with cluster farmers, but it's only in those areas where those farmers have got freehold on the land. So how do you introduce cluster farming in a communal land setup? In my village, for example, in the east of Mpumalanga, people have got small holdings per family. But if you consider the land in total that they own, if they were to bulk up together, they can make up something out of it.
They can get some of that yield gap, they can get it closed.
They can get it, yeah, because the retailers now don't want to source stuff from small holding. Never mind what the ANC proposes in its documents, where they want to set up a quota for procuring of produce from small holders, because they say the current model benefit the big guys. It's difficult for a retailer who has got a huge order in Europe of a particular type of oranges to supply, and you still have to procure some small batches there and there. They want to operate big. So perhaps it might be an opportunity for other players to come in there and enter the market to fulfill that role of being distributors of the goods coming from the smallholders. Maybe that's another opportunity that the government can perhaps look at. But I think a huge part of the land that is under communal system, in my opinion, lies wasted, because the idea that you want to operate or farm it in the old way, subsistence farming model, is not working. It can feed the family, but do you really want to feed the family and that becomes the basic point of life? No. You want to grow wealth. If you want to grow wealth, you must try and emulate the big guys. And the only way to do that is to get out of that system that I think is partly imprisoning people, unless we can modify it and encourage big-scale cluster farming.
Thank you. After the break, I want to talk about the future. Nation in Conversation will be back after the break. Welcome to Nation in Conversation. We continue our discussion on land ownership. With me in the studio, Mpumelelo Mkabela, editor of the Sowetan, and Piet Kroukamp, political analyst and columnist. Piet, these mega big farmers you talk about, and you say there's about 36 of them, these guys actually buy in and are very active in empowerment projects to broaden the base of agriculture and to get the dividends and the wealth spread amongst more people of South Africa.
Well, it's true, and it's not only them. I think it's also the next 8,000 farmers that farm on the economy of scale level. And I have, in informal ways, so I don't have figures now, but I'm busy quantifying the empowerment projects in which these big farmers are involved. And I can tell you now, I have a good chance of being right if I say it will dwarf the efforts that we have seen from the side of the state over the last 10, 15 years when it comes to real impact black economic empowerment.
Real wealth creation.
Most of these farmers have distributed land, they have distributed assets, they have distributed capacity, They have involved themselves, taking the risk of big economic empowerment projects with their workers and with partners. And much of this, I think, is unfortunately gone unnoticed, or it's not really verbalized. And that's a pity, because I think what they have shown is that if you commercialize, if you allow, do it on the basis of a business model, that redistribution of land can actually be done to the benefit of everybody in South Africa, to the beneficiaries as well as to the farmers. And they have shown that it can be done.
On pure commercial grounds?
On a per commercial basis. Nobody has to end up on the losing side if you do redistribution of land on a commercial basis. It can be done. Let me tell you this. There are 14% of all land in South Africa, all agricultural land, is in the market every year. If only that land was bought up by the state with the money that they've spent so far on redistribution, they would have had more land, more or less, or very likely up to 40% of land would have been bought up already, because every year 14% of the land is already in the market, and the government has bought land at exorbitant prices, where they could have gotten this land in the market for much, much lower prices, and often much, much better land than the land that they bought.
And if you now link to that and you get the buy-in from the commercial farmers, bigger and medium commercial farmers, it can only win.
The thing is about commercial farming is they need stability, and they know you will have to pay a price for stability, and they're willing to pay a price for stability. That includes redistribution, that includes black economic empowerment, because instability brings uncertainty, and uncertainty is the big enemy of capital. That's one of the reasons why we in the manufacturing sector and the mining sector don't have an investment of capital as a consequence of uncertainty. Farming is the same. They cannot afford uncertainty. And like the mining sector and all other sectors, you are prepared to pay a price for stability. Morally, it makes sense to redistribute land, but it also makes commercial sense to redistribute land. You broaden the economy, you broaden agriculture, and you stabilize it, and you create certainty.
Mpumelelo, Piet noted the projects that the farmers initiated. And we know capital is finicky. Capital is a coward. It looks at risk and return, and it moves wherever it wants to move. If you look at the current government thought processes, how does that link to the realities that we've discussed today?
Well, there's two ways to it. There's the farmers' initiatives that Pete is referring to, and on the other side, the government policies. What Pete is saying reminds me of what I picked up some time ago in the biography on Anton Rupert, where in 1978 already, in the height of political instability in this country, Anton Rupert already was starting to build houses for his workers in Cape Town and Johannesburg. As we all know, he was the founder of the Rembrandt Group, the multi-billion business. And he, in addition to that, he was advocating back then already that there needs to be 50-50 partnerships with black businesses in the townships. Of course, the Verwoerd government told him to go to hell. But he was saying that on the basis of what Pete is saying, that if you want political stability, there's a price to it. And he was saying, if we pull down the ladder those who are ahead of us, and we're not able to pick up the ladder those who are below us, there's a chance that we will all fall, and there's no one will benefit from that. And he was even saying, if you want to attract foreign investment, the investors are looking, how does the business model work in South Africa? They're looking at it in totality. Is it stable? Can we go there? So the idea of having a peaceful investment environment where everybody has a stake is not simply a matter of a narrow domestic issue. It also has implications on how the outside world sees us. Do they see us as an investment destination or not? And then coming to the side of the government had a target to distribute 30% of the land, of productive land to black people by the year 2014. They missed that target miserably. And as a result, there is now a new raft of policy that is now being developed. New legislation is being formulated. There's talk about ownership selling, and there's talk about partnerships with farm workers. And a lot of farmers have voiced concerns about some of this legislation because it threatens their property rights and all of that, which, by the way, is another interesting point that is in our constitution, because the constitution talks about property rights guaranteed, which was part of the settlement in the run-up to the negotiations. But at the same time, the Constitution talks about the importance of land reform and the importance of an inclusive future for everybody. So there's tension there in the way our legal setup is. So the government is battling with that. So the solution is actually for farmers, in my opinion, if you want to quicken the process for everybody to gain, is for farmers to take the initiative. I'll be very interested in the outcome of the study that Pete is going to do. The outcome we should be able to show how far are farmers taking a lead. Because what Anton Rupert was saying already in the 70s was that farmers should take the lead. And I'm happy to say that the World newspaper, which was banned by the apartheid government later on, actually praised him in its editorial, because it said what Anton Rupert was telling his fellow industrialists, who were invariably white, was that take the lead. Don't complain that the government's policies are chasing away investors because they lead to instability in the townships. Take initiative. What are you doing? I think the same call applies now. People can accuse the government of creating a mess, of creating uncertainty. But the question is, what are they doing?
Pete, how do you feel about the future?
Well, I'm pragmatic about it. I think one of the big mistakes that we make is we don't trust black South Africans with ownership, with property. And because the land, when it's redistributed, black South Africans don't get ownership. They can use the land if they want to. And we all know if we only have the right to use land or use a property, how we deal with it. I think we must transfer assets into the hands of black people. That will give them access to capital, and that will make them successful farmers. 8 to 13% of the South African economy is the informal economy. It's largely controlled by black South Africans, black capitalists, no subsidies, no support from the government, razor-thin margins, and they do very, very well. Imagine, like in rural areas, you add assets to that entrepreneurship that you already have.
Access to the formal financial system.
Formal financial system, access to capital, and then based on that, you give them a demographic dividend, which include education and health. That is the way to set up a black middle class, which is already 6 million. We can expand it significantly if we add assets to it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks for taking part in the conversation. Visit our website, nationinconversation.co.za, and follow us on Twitter @NationConverse. Please join us again as we continue with our conversations with various thought leaders in the next few weeks. From me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by Afgreen, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK, and Sendes.
The world is changing today. The world is changing in every way. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better. No matter